Steve Harvey noticed the locket first. It was a small gold oval, worn on a thin chain, hanging at the collarbone of a 9-year-old girl named Cora Sims, who was sitting in the front row of the Family Feud audience section on a Tuesday afternoon in May 2024, holding her grandmother's hand and watching the stage with the focused attention of a child who has decided that every part of this day matters. Steve noticed it during the warm-up, when he was working the audience before cameras rolled, a thing he did at every taping, moving through the rows, shaking hands, reading the room. He stopped at Cora. He crouched down. He said, "That's a pretty necklace." Cora said, "It was my birth mother's." Steve looked at it for a moment. He said, "You hold on to that." He moved on. He thought nothing more of it. And then, 40 minutes later, when the cameras were rolling and both families were at their podiums and the game was 4 questions deep, Steve Harvey looked across the stage and saw a 9-year-old girl named Noelle Hutchinson standing in the opposing family's row, wearing a thin gold chain at the collarbone with a small oval locket. And something in the back of his brain, something older and faster than conscious thought, pulled him out of the question he was asking mid-sentence and sent him walking slowly toward the center of the stage, where he stopped and looked from one side to the other and said out loud, to no one and everyone, "Hold on." The lockets were identical, not similar. Identical, same chain weight, same oval shape, same worn clasp on the left side, same small engraving on the face that the cameras, when they zoomed in, would show was a single letter, M. The girls had never met. They were 9 years old. They had been born on the same day, February 14, 2015, in the same hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. They had been separated at 4 days old and placed with different adoptive families in different states. Cora to a family in Nashville, Noelle to a family in Birmingham, Alabama, and neither family had been told the other existed, because the adoption had been processed through 2 separate agencies, and the paperwork that would have connected them had been filed in a system that did not speak to itself, and 2 little girls had grown up 1 state apart for 9 years, not knowing that somewhere there was another person in the world with their exact face. It was a Tuesday. May 14, 2024, Stage 29 at CBS Television City, Los Angeles. The Sims family from Nashville had come with Cora's adoptive mother, Janet, 44. Her adoptive father, Roy, 47. Cora's older adopted brother, Devin, 14. And Janet's mother, Cora's grandmother, Beverly, 71, who was holding Cora's hand in the front row and had been holding it since they got off the plane. The Hutchinson family from Birmingham had come with Noelle's adoptive mother, Patricia, 40, her adoptive father, Greg, 45, Patricia's sister, Donna, and Noelle's adoptive grandfather, Frank, 73, who had driven from Montgomery because he said he wasn't going to miss his granddaughter on television for anything on this earth. Both families had won their regional casting calls. Both had passed pre-interviews. Both had arrived at separate times, entered through separate doors, waited in separate green rooms. The production team, none of whom had looked closely enough at the children in the family rows to notice what Steve Harvey noticed during the warm-up, had run a standard setup. Nothing in the call sheets flagged anything unusual. Nothing in the pre-interview notes mentioned lockets, or birth mothers, or Memphis hospitals, or February 14th. Because nobody had asked, and both families had carried this the way families carry the private shapes of their children's stories, quietly, carefully, as their own. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. What Janet Sims had been carrying, what she had not put down in 9 years of Cora's life, was the knowledge that Cora had asked, beginning at age 5, 1 question in different forms, over and over. Was there someone else? Not a birth mother question. Cora understood her adoption story with the clean clarity of a child raised to know it. The question was more specific than that. She asked it after seeing twins at the grocery store when she was 5. She asked it after a school lesson on genetics when she was 7. She asked it in the car one night when she was 8, out of nowhere, in the dark, while Janet was driving. Mom, was there someone with me? Janet had said, carefully, what do you mean, baby? Cora had said, when I was born, was there someone in there with me? Janet had said she didn't know. That was true. She didn't know. What she knew was what the adoption file said, which was not very much, and what the adoption file did not say, which was everything that mattered. She had tried to find out. In 2021, when Cora was 6, Janet had contacted the adoption agency that had placed Cora and requested access to the original birth records. The agency had informed her that the records were sealed under Tennessee adoption law and could not be released without a court order. Janet had filed a petition for record access in early 2022. The petition had been reviewed and denied in June 2022 on the grounds that the biological parent had not filed a consent to release. Janet had hired a private attorney in August 2022 to file an amended petition with additional documentation. That petition had been pending for 19 months as of the morning of the Family Feud taping. The legal fees had reached $7,400. Roy had not complained. Janet had not told Cora. Cora kept asking in her different forms, and Janet kept saying she didn't know, which was true, and which cost her something every time. The locket had come with Cora from the hospital. It had been placed in the hospital bag by a nurse, not by the birth mother, who had not been present at placement, but by a social worker who had found it in the birth mother's personal effects and made a decision, on her own authority, outside of protocol, to include it. The social worker's name was recorded in the file. The file was sealed. Janet had never seen the name. She had never known why the locket was there, or what the M stood for. She had clasped it around Cora's neck for the first time when Cora was 3, and Cora had asked what it was, and Janet had said, something someone wanted you to have. And Cora had said, someone who loved me? And Janet had said, yes, someone who loved you. Cora had worn it every day since. Patricia Hutchinson, in Birmingham, had told Noelle the exact same thing about her locket at the exact same age. Neither mother knew the other existed. Steve Harvey stood at center stage and looked from Cora in the front row to Noelle in the Hutchinson family row at the far side of the stage. He looked at the lockets. He looked at the girls' faces. He looked at the lockets again. The camera on position 1 caught his expression in the moment before he spoke, and the production team in the booth later said that watching that monitor in real time was the moment they knew something was happening that had nothing to do with the game show they were taping. He said, "I need everybody to stop for a second." The studio fell completely silent. He walked to Cora first. He crouched in front of her. He said, "Sweetheart, can I look at your necklace?" Cora nodded. He looked at it, without touching it. The engraved M. The worn clasp on the left side. He stood. He walked across the stage to the Hutchinson family row, where Noelle was standing with her arms at her sides, watching him come toward her with the watchful attention of a child who has learned to read adult behavior carefully. He crouched in front of Noelle. He said, "Can I look at yours?" Noelle lifted the locket from her collarbone. He looked at it for a long time. Same M. Same clasp, same weight on the same thin chain. He stood up slowly. He turned to the production booth. He made the flat horizontal gesture, the cut signal, and said, "We need a minute." Then he turned back to the stage and looked at Cora, 9 years old in the front row in Nashville clothes, with her grandmother Beverly's hand. And he looked at Noelle. 9 years old, in the Hutchinson family row in Birmingham Close, with her grandfather Frank standing next to her. And he said, to both of them, to the room, to the 4 cameras that were still rolling because nobody in the booth had actually cut, I think I know something about you two. The studio fell completely silent. Janet Sims was on her feet before Steve finished the sentence. Patricia Hutchinson, across the stage, was already looking at the front row, at Cora, at the locket, at Cora's face, with the expression of a woman whose brain is running a calculation that her body already knows the answer to. Steve walked back to center stage. He said, I'm going to ask both of these families something, and I need you to stay with me. He looked at Janet. He said, where was your daughter born? Janet said, Memphis Baptist Memorial. He looked at Patricia. He said, and yours? Patricia said, in a voice that had gone very careful and very still, Memphis Baptist Memorial. February, she stopped. She looked at Janet. She said, February 14th? Janet Sims sat down in her seat. She did not sit down because she chose to. Her legs made the decision. Roy caught her. Beverly, 71, Cora's grandmother, still holding Cora's hand, looked at the locket at Cora's collarbone and then at the locket at Noelle's collarbone and put her free hand over her mouth. Noelle looked at Cora across the stage. Cora looked at Noelle. They were 9 years old. They did not have the words for what they were looking at. They did not need the words. Cora raised her hand, not dramatically, just raised it, the way a child raises a hand in a classroom when they know the answer, and pointed at Noelle and looked at her mother and said, Mom, is that her? Nobody in the room could speak. Steve Harvey walked to the family row where Beverly was sitting, and he crouched in front of her, and he said quietly, for her alone, though the mic caught it, did you know? Beverly shook her head. She said, I knew there might be. Janet filed, there were legal things we never found. She stopped. She looked at Noelle across the stage. She said, she has Cora's hands. Noelle, who had walked from the Hutchinson family row to the center of the stage because nobody had told her not to, and she had decided she was going to, was now standing 6 feet from Cora. Cora had stood up from her seat and walked to meet her. They were the same height. They had the same nose. The same way of standing with their weight slightly to the left. The same thin gold chain at the same collarbone with the same engraved letter and the same worn clasp. They stood and looked at each other for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. Then Noelle said, your necklace is like mine. Cora said, I know. Noelle said, do you know what the M is for? Cora said, no, do you? Noelle said, no, I always wanted to know. Cora said, me too. They were 9. That was the whole conversation. It was sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was the whole thing. Steve Harvey stood at center stage and watched 2 9-year-old girls solve in 30 seconds what sealed records and court petitions and 19 months of pending legal fees had not been able to solve in 9 years, which was simply this: the locating of each other. He watched them and he was not performing anything, and the crew was not okay, and the audience was not okay, and the 2 families on either side of the stage were in various states of being not okay in ways that were going to take a long time to fully process, and none of that mattered. Right now, because right now 2 9-year-old girls were standing at center stage comparing lockets. Noelle looked at Steve Harvey. She said, in the smallest voice, are you sad, Mr. Steve? Steve Harvey said, no, baby, I'm the opposite of sad. I just don't have a word for it right now. Noelle considered this. Then she said, my grandpa Frank says that's what happy feels like when it's too big. The studio fell completely silent. And then it wasn't silent at all. The crew was not okay. Harold, the floor director, was not okay. The camera operator at position 3 was not okay. The audio engineer in the booth, a 20-year industry veteran who had worked awards shows and live sporting events and had never, in 2 decades, taken off her headset during a session, took off her headset. Steve wasn't done. He said, "Let me tell you something." The room stilled. He said, "There was a night, I don't say this often, there was a night I wrote a letter to my family. A goodbye letter. I was at the very bottom of everything, and I couldn't see another way through it. And I'm standing here today because of what happened next, which was nothing dramatic. I just didn't send it. I woke up the next morning, and I didn't send it. And that one morning became another morning, and now I'm standing on a stage where 2 little girls just found each other, and I want to tell you something about that." He looked at Janet. He looked at Patricia. He said, "You both kept going. You filed the forms and paid the lawyers and answered the questions and kept going even when nothing came back. And today, it came back. Not through a courthouse. Not through a petition. Through a gold necklace and a Tuesday in May. God works in the margin between what we plan and what actually happens. Today he worked in that margin. He called for a phone. He told both families he wanted to make a call. He said there was someone he thought deserved to know what had just happened in this room. Someone who had made a decision years ago outside of protocol that had turned out to be the most important decision in this story. The production team reached the social worker, whose name was in the sealed file, a woman named Gloria Tate, 58, now retired, who had placed the locket in Cora's hospital bag on a February morning in 2015 and had thought about those 2 girls, on and off, for 9 years. Because that is what people do when they make decisions they know matter and have no way of knowing how they land. Gloria Tate picked up on the second ring from her home in Memphis. When the production coordinator explained who was calling and why, there was a silence of 8 seconds. Then she said, in a voice that had gone very small, "Did they find each other?" Steve said, "They're standing right here. Both of them." Gloria said, "Oh Lord." Steve held the phone toward the center of the stage. Cora and Noelle were still standing together. Steve said, "Girls, there's someone on the phone who would like to know you're both okay." Cora said, into the phone, in the clear and serious voice of a 9-year-old addressing an adult, "We're okay. We found each other." Gloria Tate made a sound on the other end of the line that no one in the room would be able to describe accurately afterward. Steve Harvey took the phone back. He said, "Miss Tate, you put that locket in that bag on your own authority. You did that." A pause. She said, "I just couldn't leave it." He said, "You didn't, and that's why this room exists today." Steve wasn't done. Both families received their prizes. The production team arranged for the Sims and Hutchinson families to be seated together for the remainder of the day. Janet and Patricia sat next to each other in a side room after the taping. Roy and Greg shook hands. Devin, 14, Cora's older brother, sat next to Noelle's grandfather Frank, 73, and they talked about the drive from Montgomery and whether it was worth it. And Frank said, "Son, I would have driven from the moon." And Devin said, "Yeah, same." Cora and Noelle spent the afternoon together in a production green room while the adults handled the parts that adults handle. They were given paper and markers. When a production assistant checked on them an hour later, they had drawn a picture. It was 2 girls standing next to each other, holding hands. Above the girls they had written, in alternating handwriting, 1 letter each. Spelling out 1 word, sisters. The picture is framed. There are 2 copies. One in Nashville. One in Birmingham. The clip, 19 minutes and 4 seconds, posted without edits, reached 110 million views in 14 hours, the fastest any Family Feud clip had ever moved in that window. By the end of the week, it was at 310 million. By the end of May 2024, it had been seen 490 million views across all platforms, the highest of any clip in the show's history, shared in 91 countries, translated into 34 languages. The hashtag #GodPutYouBothHere trended globally for 17 consecutive days. 3 separate adoption law reform bills in 3 states cited the clip in their legislative record as evidence of the systemic gap between separated siblings and the sealed record laws that prevent families from finding each other. Tennessee opened a formal review of its sealed adoption record statute in June 2024. In July 2024, Steve Harvey's foundation launched the Matching Hands Foundation, named for the moment Beverly said she noticed: the identical hands. In its first year, the foundation funded legal access for 12,000 adoptees seeking original birth records, partnered with 27 adoption agencies to establish sibling search protocols that cross-referenced placements from the same birth, and established a dedicated fund to cover the petition and attorney costs that had stalled Janet Sims for 19 months. By mid-2024, the foundation had helped facilitate 580 confirmed sibling connections. Gloria Tate joined the foundation's advisory board. She drove to Nashville from Memphis to attend the launch event. She met Cora and Noelle in person for the first time. Noelle asked her what the M stood for. Gloria said, "Your birth mother's name was Marie." Both girls were quiet for a moment. Then Cora said, "That's a pretty name." Noelle said, "Yeah," they looked at each other. They had the same expression. They would always have the same expression. The legal petition Janet Sims had filed in 2022 was resolved in August 2024. 19 months after it was first submitted, 3 months after the taping, when the Tennessee court granted access to the original birth record under a new judicial interpretation of the good cause exemption. The record confirmed what the Locketts had already told them. The social worker's name was in the file. It was Gloria Tate. Cora and Noelle see each other once a month. The families alternate: 1 month Nashville, 1 month Birmingham. 2 hours and 40 minutes on I-65 that both families now describe as the best drive they make all year. On the 3rd visit, Cora stayed overnight. On the 4th, Noelle did. On the 5th visit, which was October, they went to a pumpkin patch and came home with 17 pumpkins between them because they could not agree on which ones to put back and eventually stopped trying. Devin carried 12 of them to the car. He did not complain. He was 14 and too old to say out loud that he thought this was one of the best days of his life, so he didn't say it. But Frank noticed and told Roy in the parking lot, and Roy told Janet that night, and Janet put it in the journal she had been keeping since Cora was 3. The journal that started with the question, "Was there someone with me?" The answer was yes. The answer had always been yes. It just needed a Tuesday in May and a man who noticed a locket and trusted what the noticing was telling him. Cora and Noelle both wear their lockets every day. They have discussed, seriously and at length, what to do about the M. They have decided to leave it. They know what it stands for now, but they also know what it meant before they knew. That it was something someone wanted them to have. That it was something someone who loved them had left behind. That it had kept them company through 9 years of being apart and had brought them to the same stage on the same Tuesday, and had done its job so completely that adding anything to it would only be less. So, they leave it. The M stays. Marie stays. The thin gold chain at the collarbone stays. And when they stand next to each other, which is as often as two families in two states can arrange it. They have the same chain, and the same locket, and the same M, and the same nose, and the same way of standing with their weight slightly to the left, and the only thing different from 9 years ago is that they finally know who they are standing next to. Which was, the whole time, the only thing that was ever missing. If you know someone who has been searching for a missing piece, a person, a name, a part of their story that was taken before they were old enough to hold on to it, send them this. They don't need a caption. The locket is the caption. Subscribe if you're new, because this channel keeps the stories that keep going long after the cameras stop. And if you have ever sat in a front row, holding a piece of something you couldn't name, waiting for the day it makes sense, it makes sense. Sometimes it just takes a Tuesday.